Okay. Hi, everyone. I think we're on. Welcome. Can I have my speakers put their cameras on? Hi. Hi, Luz. Hi, Bridget. Lovely to see you. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many people participating. We're going to mute mics for those of you who are not directly talking in this panel at this moment. And then when we finish the official part, we will invite everyone to participate. So welcome to this panel where we will discuss the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action and specifically the Section J. We have today really distinguished speakers for this panel, which I'm going to introduce in a minute. I just want to say that today is also the first day of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So we're happy to have our panel contribute to this important 16 days of awareness raising activism happening around the world. And with the Section J, we will focus on three issues. Or first, we will debate a little bit or reflect a little bit on the history of this platform. How did it come about? How did we get to this Section J? And secondly, we will talk about what it meant for our work globally. And lastly, we will think and reflect if this section and the framework is still relevant for women's rights in the media globally. And if not, what do we need to do to change it, or how do we expand it? And okay, so without further ado, I will now introduce the speakers. And I will start with Maria Eugenia Maru Chavez from Mexico. Maru is a Mexican prominent feminist activist and media professional. And can we have Maru now on the screen when I'm introducing her, or I'm talking now to our tech support. I don't know what the screen looks like for you, but I only see Sonia Capio's black screen on my computer. Okay, I don't know. Nothing is changing.
So we can see her.
Oh, you can? Okay, so it's only, I don't see anybody then. That's going to be fun. Okay, but I'm going to continue then. So Maru is a prominent Mexican feminist activist and media professional. She founded Violeta Radio, and I hope, Maru, you can pronounce this better than me, the first feminist community radio station in Mexico City, which began broadcasting in March 2019. And the radio aimed to empower women and address issues related to gender equality. And Maru has also been involved with the World Association of Communication Radio Broadcasters, serving on its advisory board. Welcome, Maru. Our next speaker is Frida Vorden, who I hope you can see on your screen. She's an American-Canadian radio producer and a significant figure in feminist media. She co-founded and served as the series producer of Wings, Women's International News Gathering Service, a weekly radio series that has been active since 1986, focusing on women's issues globally. Frida has held leadership roles in the International Association of Women in Radio and Television, IWART, including as its president, and has been recognized with a number of Lifetime Achievement Awards for her contributions to community radio and women's media globally, including in 2015 with a Lifetime Achievement Award from International Association of Women in Radio and Television. Welcome, Frida. We're really happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Our next guest and speaker is Rachel Nakitara. She's a seasoned media professional from Kenya, currently serving as technical manager of the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit at the Parliament of Kenya. She's an active member and a former president also of IWART. She has worked extensively on addressing hate speech in and through the media, as well as advocating for women's rights online, in addition to contributing to initiatives to promote women's participation in media and broadcasting. In 2022, Rachel was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Broadcast Producer and Editor Award at the 2022 Annual Journalism Excellence Award which was held in Nairobi. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes, happy to have you. Our next speaker is Birgit Jallow from Denmark, who is the founding director of Empower House, an initiative dedicated to empowering women and men and their communities and advancing sustainable community media worldwide. Since 1980, she has supported community media in over 75 countries, emphasizing the empowerment of marginalized voices, particularly women. In recognition of her contributions, Birgit received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Women's Institute for Freedom of the Press in 2022. Birgit is an active IWORD member since the early 2010, and in 2018, she was also co-opted to the International Board to support the organization's development and helps develop our organization's strategic plans. Welcome, Birgit.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, Greta.
Yes, great to see you. And last but not least is our speaker from the Philippines, Luz Zimban. She's an award-winning journalist who worked in print, broadcast, and online news organizations for more than 30 years, 12 of which she spent at the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. She co-founded the independent online news site Vera Files with 5 other women journalists. She won the prestigious Marshall McLuhan Fellowship and Nino Aquino Fellowship for journalism and received a Konrad Adenauer Scholarship. And sorry for my pronunciation. She has been teaching journalism for the past 27 years and is a member of the faculty of Ateneo de Manila University and executive director of its Asian Center for Journalism. She also received the Glory Award for an outstanding alumna of the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication. Welcome, Luz.
Hi, nice to see everyone tonight.
Great to have you. And as you see, our speakers are truly, truly impressive and important figures in the feminist global movement. So without further ado, I will just really quickly introduce the first, and I think I'm the one who's going to now share the presentation. So let's see if it works. Can you see? Yes, perfect. So we're going to start with first with a little bit of, as I said, a historical overview, or we will ask our panelists, or we have asked our panelists to prepare and reflect on this question. How did the Section J and within the Beijing Platform for Action come about? We want to really stress or give honor to the grassroots movement that has meant and led to this section, that we want to say with great responsibility that this section was not handed down to women and women's movements by the UN or any other important body, but it was fought for with global activism and lobbying that happened decades before the platform came about. And here we're going to now invite our speakers and our panelists to revisit the history and honor the efforts that made it possible and showcase the grassroots nature of the victory. And now we will start with Rachel Nakitare from Kenya. Rachel, you can now take the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Greta. Happy 16 days of activism to all of us that begin today. It is our 16 days to really shout, our 16 days to re-energize and to focus our campaign on violence against women. So, yeah, being the first to start, I think I'll just reflect back on the resolution that was made in, I think, 1972, that then the UN resolution 3010 then, that ensured that there was a reflection on how women were performing and issues of gender equality. And so they declared 1975 the International Women's Year. And that year was, I think, celebrated in Mexico. And at that time, I think it was just being looked at broadly as gender equality in terms of development and in terms of peace building, I think, because of what was happening. And so during the launch of the resolution on gender equality, I think 5 years later, when it was celebrated in Copenhagen in 1980, again in Denmark, it was still a reflection of how are women treated. I think at that time you're looking at especially issues of payment, equal payment, like a woman and a man are performing the same roles, but a man is being paid more. If I look at the Kenyan situation during that time, there was very little involvement of women, especially in leadership in terms of politics. I think we only had one woman elected into parliament. The first woman in 1969 was Grace Onyango. God rest her soul. She died last year. And after that, very few women were also represented in leadership. And so I'll fast forward to the Nairobi conference, which was a women's conference, which was held 10 years after the inauguration in 1975, and so this was in 1985. And when I look at that conference, three things come to mind: being intentional, being focused, and being very strategic. Because I remember that at that time, with very little participation of women in all spheres, that is cultural, political, economic, social, and of course, because of the patriarchal nature of the society that we have in Kenya, it was not easy for women to participate. And the fact that the chair of the Nairobi conference was Miss Margaret Kenyatta, who was the daughter of the then president in Kenya, for me was very strategic enough in ensuring that this conference was given the prominence that was desired. And it's at this Nairobi conference that actually, in reflecting the decade that had been now, because from 1975 to 1985, that had been 10 years since the declaration. And so there was more focus in terms of looking at the nitty-gritties of what are we looking at when we talk about women's empowerment or gender equality. And I think for the first time, there were 10 items that were looked at, the 10 items that were itemized, so that it moved from broadly being issues of just development broadly and peace, and looked at issues of access to education, access to employment, and also access to adequate health. And it's during this Nairobi meeting that the 12 action points were pointed out. And in the 12, at least there was now clear issues of CEDAW, looking at CEDAW and the ratification of them, all forms of discrimination against women. And for me, the focus at that point, or what came more in focus, was the increased global awareness on advocacy about the status of women and the need for their full participation in all aspects of society. I think at that point, then media, or we as women in the media, come to focus in terms of how do we amplify the efforts that were being made across board in terms of gender equality to the public. And when I look at the Kenyan situation, I think much as the women participation, especially in leadership, was very low, after the Nairobi conference, I think there was more focus now on gender equality, and there was now deliberate nomination of even members, women members of parliament, who included the likes of Grace Ogot. I think Grace was nominated, and the women that then began to play a more active role in politics. But what really interested me in that Nairobi conference was the fact that now media had been given a very clear role. So fast forward then coming to Beijing on and the declaration of the Beijing Platform of Action, then it comes very clear that then Section J is dedicated to women or to media, so that now we begin to look more deeply into how women are being portrayed, how women are participating, how gender is being mainstreamed across board in all development spheres. So because we all be looking at that, I just thought I can do a quick run through of how then we came up to the Beijing Platform of Action and the Section J that we'll be talking more deeply about. Thank you, Greta.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rachel. And now we will have Luz from Philippines. And I just want to remind our speakers that we want to keep it brief to 3 minutes, more or less, so that we have the meeting round up about in 1 hour or so. So please, Luz, and let me know if you need me to flip your slides or if you want to do it yourself.
Sure. I'll let you know.
Okay.
So in the Philippines, this is a cliche, but we stand on the shoulders of generations of women before us who fought colonialism, the dictatorship, and all forms of oppression and abuse. So in Philippine history, one of the heroines who fought Spanish rule in the 1700s is named Gabriela Silang. And she's one of the biggest alliances of Filipino women at present is named after her, Gabriela. So this tradition of women's participation continued in our country's struggle against Spanish colonial rule, and during the American occupation, women's organizations started being formed. In the media, we see women organizing to create publications for women that, although they were looked at as shallow, the so-called lipstick beat fashion and lifestyle publications, nevertheless, they gave women a presence in media and some experience in managing magazines. We also saw women being recognized as a distinct segment of the audience. One of these women-led magazines is called Mr. and Miss. It was published by Mrs. Eugenia Apostol, and this later evolved as a publication that stood up to the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., who is the father of our current president. It published stories that the mainstream media would not. From Mr. and Miss, Mrs. Apostol would later put up the Philippine Daily Inquirer to quench the people's thirst for information that Marcos restricted during his time. There were also women columnists and reporters in other Marcos-controlled newspapers at the time, and it was they who chipped at the surface of censorship to unearth stories that Marcos didn't want the people to know about. But elsewhere, the women's movement was vibrant. That's why I think leading up to Beijing, there was a huge contingent from the Philippines. Now, Greta, can you please show the slide? Officially, if you look at the Philippine government's declaration in 1975, they created the National Commission on the Role of Filipino Women, which later became the Commission on Filipino Women. And then in 1980, the Philippines became signatory to CEDAW. And then 1986, we had our first woman president, Cory Aquino. And it led to the passage of the 1987 Constitution that had a lot of provisions recognizing women, women's development, and gender. So this is the groundwork before Beijing 1995. The women's sector in the Philippines was quite active and vibrant. So you have those from the human rights groups and the anti-dictatorship struggle, as well as the government and official women's organizations. So that's where we were. And I was at Beijing, and I was so happy to see this diverse array of women who were there from the Huairu and in Beijing. It was such a fantastic event. Thank you.
Fantastic, really inspiring to hear this story of the struggle and the way that women have been organizing for so many decades. Brigitte, now from the Philippines, I was gonna say from Denmark, and Brigitte, you're gonna use the slideshow yourself, right? I think you have to unmute yourself.
Kind of detail. We never learn. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
I can also say that in 1975, I was a high school student, and we heard about this year dedicated to women, and everybody meeting up in Mexico. And we had in Denmark in the 70s a very vibrant women's movement, which was all about breaking the silence and demanding women on all public stages, in the arts, in science, in business, in the media, everywhere. And we created our own media, a magazine called Kvinder, which means women, our own community radio station, just to mention a few. When preparing for the Copenhagen 1980 conference, we stood on the shoulders of, as Rachel just said, the work in 75 focusing on equality, development, and peace, and where the resolution coming out of there was to focus on education, on employment opportunities, and adequate health service for women. And in Copenhagen in 1980, just to focus on the media resolutions, was to improve women's access, to challenge stereotypes, and to promote equitable representation. And all of this, we in the NGO movement in Copenhagen worked on to prepare for Nairobi. On the buttons, you can see that we raised funds for women from developing countries to travel to Nairobi. And we looked at how we could document women's role and image in the media, how we could work with other organizations and researchers and be as prepared as possible to meet women from the rest of the world to discuss this. When we came to Nairobi in 1985, the official UN government conference took place at the Kenyatta Conference Center, and we in the NGO forum met at the Nairobi University on the lawn. Our minister, who you can see here to the right, with me recording her for our radio, she came every morning and reported on what had happened in the official conference in the Kenyatta Conference Center. And we could challenge her, we could tell her what we had discussed, and ask her to bring our concerns to the government conference to ensure that our voices were also heard. I took the opportunity to interview a lot of African media women and developed a series of documentaries, which I've just had digitized and will be available on my website soon if any of you should be interested in that. But what came out of all these conversations with women was that actually, as an African woman in the media, which was very much like what we had found out in Denmark, is that if we want proper representation, the real images we want, then women will simply have to reinvent communication. We discussed this, and out of the official conference came one of the 10 priority areas that had to be struggled for getting in there, because media was just considered, as Rachel said, as something that should describe and campaign for all the other issues. But to look at media as something important in our own right, we had to struggle to get the recommendations in there. But they included improving women's access to media and to communication, also in rural areas, challenging stereotypes, improving the image, and promoting a fair and proper representation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Really, really, really great reflection. And I love the images, Birgit. Next, we have Maru from Mexico. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning in Mexico and in US and Canada. Frida, hi. Nice to see you here. Thank you for this meeting, to Greta, Birgit, and all the organizers, because I think that it is important to meet and speak about these issues that I think that is not very common in the feminist movement, I think, because well, speaking of communication and feminism is a little bit complex for me. And to start, I just want to recall what was my the influence of the first feminist, at least the women's conference in 1975. I would like to share that I was a little girl at that time. I was six years old, and I remember my aunt and my mother talking about this conference. I mean, I am from a very little village in the state of Veracruz, and I remember that the conference had a big influence in the ordinary life of women in Mexico. in that sense, I think that conferences, when at that time, the 70s, that conference was very important for women in Mexico and, of course, in the world, because the UN was communicating about or broadcasting about it. So I I don't have experiences about this conference, participating in this conference, but I think that it was very important, because I remember my my aunts and my mother and other women in the village talking about women's rights, and I remember my aunts dressing with short skirts and their long hair. They, for me at that time, they were beautiful young women just speaking about their rights. And then this is what I can say. It's not very political, but it's experience that impact had impact in the life of ordinary women. And I will just say that conference was a great thing at that time.
Wonderful memory. Thank you so much, Maru. And last but not least, we will ask Frida to reflect on her experience of leading up to. And also unmute yourself.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So being a lot older than Maru, I needed to write mine down because I forget things. Okay. About this, in the 1970s, I got into feminist media in print and on radio. It was very exciting. In 1975, at the first UN World Conference on Women in Mexico City, I met the organizers who had founded the International Women's Tribune Center. They thought women around the world should learn about their rights, so they designed posters, each focused on one right, translated those into a myriad of national and local languages, and sent them out all over the world. Their office would become the meeting point for women who lobbied the UN about communication rights. They were right across the street from the UN in New York. And Ann Walker has published a book about their work. I don't know if you're showing the slides or not.
Yes.
Okay, there's Ann Walker's book. Thank you. In 1984, I discovered Dr. Donna Allen's Media Report to Women. Her principles of women's media helped shape the movement. And we finally met each other in 1991 at a women's media conference in the Philippines. She was promoting two-way satellite communication among women around the world. It didn't work, by the way. Decades later, we have Zoom. In 1985, there was the Third World Conference on Women in Nairobi, and briefly, that appeared in mainstream media in the US. But when Wings applied for government funds to keep covering the global women's movement, the government told us this is an idea whose time has passed. We were in the US then. Public radio, for which I'd worked, was intensely allergic to feminism. Luckily, we discovered AMARC, the World Association of Community Radio Broadcasters. Our program, Wings, Women's International News Gathering Service, has been in distribution to that sector for 38 years. During the Reagan era, public support for anything about women dried up. The efforts of one woman who had inherited oil money helped keep feminist communication going. Genevieve Vaughn, who was a creator of the Peace Tent at the Nairobi conference, also convened radio women there. Later, she hired Puerto Rican feminist Maria Suarez to produce a daily feminist shortwave program in Spanish and English out of Radio for Peace International in Costa Rica. I've just released an interview with Maria about how their project, FIRE, influenced the 1994 UN World Conference on Population and Development, facilitating discussions, gathering information, bringing mainstream media to the women, and shifting the perspective from, quote, population control to women's reproductive choice. Feminist media women were also active at the World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna in 1993, the one where it finally sank in that women's rights are human rights. Mel Johnson, next slide, please, from IAWRT, hosted a women's press room there. They did get women's issues included in mainstream media. However, the coverage focused on violence against women and not what women activists were doing about it. Maria and I both lobbied the UN about media during the run-up to the 1995 Fourth World Conference on Women. There were a lot of other persuasive women involved from around the world. Two countries that did not like Section J were China and the United States. China omitted Section J entirely from their document about the conference agenda. Bill Clinton ignored it. There was no official follow-up at all in the US about implementation of Section J. That concludes this section. Thank you.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Thank you so much, Frida and everyone. I want to just say that my first time when I heard about the Section J was from this book, Margaret Gallagher's book, Gender Setting. I don't know if maybe you read it. And I remember I was working in TV, and I already had graduated from gender studies, and I never heard about Section J in this program. And then when I read this book, I was like, this is what I'm going to do now. And I moved to Norway and continue trying to work with gender in the media in my PhD and later. Okay, that was really, really fascinating to hear your history and your reflections, and to see how the conference and the discussions and the movements have shaped our lives from different moments of our lives, from when we were little girls to when we were, students and activists ourselves, and gearing up to face the challenges of this corrupted world and politicians who like to ignore us, and then deciding to become politicians ourselves, and so on. So for the next section, for the next part of the webinar or our meeting here, I would like us to now reflect on how the Section J has shaped our work, or specifically your work, and the work in your country or in your region. And just for those who maybe are not familiar with the Section J, specifically how it's worded in the Beijing Platform for Action, here we have a slide with exactly the excerpts from the document, from the framework. And Section J is called Women in the Media, and there are two objectives. Section J1, which talks about increased participation and access of women in media and decision-making processes, and section with objective J2, strategic objective J2, talks about promotion of balanced and non-stereotypical portrayal of women in the media. So we have sort of two angles to this work on women in the media, one looking at more like at content, and the one at the environment or around working conditions and access to decision-making power, and who decides what content is produced, basically, and how it can be done. So for now, we will, I encourage you to narrate around your experience with working with the framework, the successes and the challenges, and what it meant just for you personally, or for your company, for your organization, or for your country more broadly, however you feel fits. And now we will start the second section with Frida. So we're going in the opposite direction.
Oh, you confused
Sorry.
me.
Sorry.
Okay. I was going to wait. Let's see. All right, let me open the next script. There we go. Okay. I have reflections on each of the strategic objectives. And I'll just say for objective one, The community radio sector where I focus has been a great resource for women. Well before Beijing, women in AMARC, that's the World Association of Community Radio Broadcasters, you remember, organized for women's representation in leadership of that organization and had a women's caucus. AMARC has been closed in much of the world now except for Asia. However, in the US, Canada, and Australia have national community radio organizations. And in Canada, that organization voted years ago for women's leadership parity. In Dr. Donna Allen's description of feminist media, she finds it differs from male-dominated media in being less focused on conflict, more collaborative, and more open to the people covered speaking for themselves. However, women who rise in existing hierarchies sometimes drop these values. I remember U.S. women who had been initiators and champions of women's access in community radio, upon rising to salaried positions of power, removing women's department resources and trying to cancel the women's program for crimes like, quote, having rotating hosts. They believed making community radio more professional would improve listenership and fundraising, but that turned out not to be the case. I moved to Canada in 2002 to work at a campus community radio station. Women in our sector raised funds for a survey that showed women's participation was up, but they still got relatively little airtime compared to men. At our station, men tended to host long, late-night music shows. I established a 1-hour weekly women's program to bring women in and train them. That still exists over 20 years later. I also co-taught a course about women and media at the university that included on-air training, and I made sure to show my favorite movie, Born in Flames, in which women who have been sidelined after the socialist revolution run an illegal mobile radio station and take over a network TV show live on air. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives just reviewed the impact of the Beijing Platform for Action in Canada. They said women were just over, this is new, they said women were just over 51% of newsroom staff in 2023, compared to the 48.3% of men and 0.3% non-binary. The women were also much more ethnically diverse than the men. Commentary and opinion by women had increased, but men's voices still outnumbered women's by more than 2 to 1. In 2022, 92% of women and non-binary journalists surveyed reported job-connected harassment and misogynistic threats, and those are increasing. So it's getting a little grim. Okay, strategic objective 2, promote a balanced and non-stereotypical portrayal of women in the media. I think this is an ongoing struggle. CBC Radio 1, which is my favorite go-to media, does an excellent job of this balanced portrayal, I think. But overall, I think media are just expanding or shifting the stereotypes. You see women being violent like men, and pornography that is so stereotypical that artificial intelligence can now produce it. Not being an expert, I won't go on about this. Done.
Okay. Thank you, Frida. So I think this is going to be common experience of us, like some successes and some optimistic numbers with increased, and then some backside of this, or I don't know how to. My English is disappearing suddenly. Sorry. So I will now pass the voice to Maru from Mexico. We are going in the opposite direction now, so just be prepared.
Yes.
Next will be Brigitte.
Yes, thank you. My English is only also disappearing. If it was sometime. Okay, then I apologize for my English. When you invited me to speak about this, the chapter J, I asked myself if this chapter have had some role in my work and in Mexico at all. I mean, in communicators or journalists work in Mexico. And suddenly I started to ask many questions, more than answers. And I think that in some moment, this chapter have been forgotten. I don't, and of course, all this is from my experience, from my daily work and daily relationship with women communicators, women in Mexico, and journalists. And I think that from all over this platform, this chapter is the chapter that have been less worked. I don't remember any action or any summit or any meeting that had been in Mexico about this chapter, except for those moments when will be in the anniversary of Beijing 95.
Mm-hmm.
I remember 10 years ago, I was invited to a forum about this chapter in Mexico City. And of course, we talk about it, and we did some suggestion for the inform at the UN, but never more have heard about. So I think that this chapter is very important, but it's not clear for me who is behind the work of this chapter. I mean, the government or the organizations or media owners, etc. I think that chapter J is just put on, and that was important at the moment, historical moment, but never take care of. No one took care about it. I think, I mean, of course, there are organizations, women's organizations, of course, there are part of the feminist movement, but I ask myself if this chapter has had some influence in the context of Mexico, at least for women journalists or women communicators. Then I can say that for me, at the personal level, there is no influence, or there is no a big role of this chapter in my work. And I think, sorry if I am taking time, I'm over time.
Yes, a little bit, but it's okay.
Okay,
You can finish.
I will finish. Then I think that we need to do a review from the legislation, how this chapter is reflected in legislation of every country. That's my point of view. Thank you.
That's a good point. I think there is quite a lot of reports like this now that exist. So we can probably look at one from Mexico. but maybe we do that after after the meeting. And now I would like Brigitte to reflect on the relevance of Section J for her work from the perspective of Denmark. And again, unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Brett. So sorry. Yeah, I would say that actually all that Section J is about is kind of in my blood, and it is the focus of my work life. And I cannot say that it's because of the Beijing platform, but in any case, again, I take you up on the offer to do things more personal, but I will also talk a bit about Denmark. Personally, I have continued working with the women's radio. I was part of the first community TV here, and I have continued to travel the world here in Uganda, looking into the impact of community radio in women's lives. And in my thesis, A Counter Image in Sound, with two other women, we examined what is radio's liberating potential? How is it that we have to organize community radio in order to actually achieve what we want? I traveled Europe. Women on the Air is a report of women's radio around Europe, which I presented at the AMAC conference. Frida was telling about the International Association of Community Radio when it all opened in 1983, and I have been reporting in conferences. So very much both seeking documentation, researching, systematizing, and presenting this area. In Denmark, where I'm based, I can say that in 1995, we developed a searchable expert database, which I've seen happen in other countries also, in order to increase the representation and the female expert voices in the media. I just checked before we went on air, and the past 24 hours in Danish media broadly, 2/3 of all voices of all experts interviewed were men. We had women's working groups established of journalists, of researchers, and mixed in order to research and see how could we actually turn these Section J into reality. We had quite a bit of research carried out. We still have, and as the report from the past 24 hours, the research results are, despite active discussion, sad. Women are not properly reflected, even in media that have set it as a priority. Anecdotally, I can say that the image of women and girls is, I think, in many ways, largely improved since 75, since 95, but there's still way to go. I think the double gaze that was highlighted both in Nairobi and in Beijing, to remember this that we walk on 2 feet, that we have the professional women and we have the alternative women's media is important to remember. We also discuss this in Denmark. In our review report for Beijing Plus 30 in Denmark that was prepared in June, the focus is on freedom from violence, stigma, and stereotypes. There is, just like several of you have reported on this morning, we don't have any particular reflection on Section J, but there's a lot of focus on social media. And as you can see here from the report, 49% of 9 to 17-year-old girls indicate having experienced a digital violation within the past year. And this means that the media focus in Denmark, reported in this national report, doesn't mean that it has covered everything, is very much on digital education, on engaging schools, students, teachers, and parents in working against this very dramatic, actually, negative development of social media on young people's lives. Also, criminalization of grooming was one of the results that the Danish report reflected on. And I don't need to go into this, but just say happy November 25, because a lot of the work that otherwise is reported from Denmark has to do with gender-based violence and dialogue against violence with young people and so on, but not much on media and communication outside of social media. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brigitte. Very interesting. And then Luz, it's your turn.
Okay. So I covered the UN conference in Beijing for the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, and I was allowed to do television stories for one of the top networks in the Philippines, ABS-CBN. Even if I was not a reporter there, I was allowed to contribute. So that started for me. Sort of a focus on women. The Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, where I work, placed me in charge of a newly created women's desk, which generated various stories about women. These were in-depth, investigative, audiovisual, which we produced with the support from UNFPA, if I'm not mistaken. Among the audiovisual stories we did were those about violence against women in small urban poor communities. And we also did a story about women warriors in the Muslim secessionist movement here. The challenge was to look for untold stories and produce them in a way that will attract audiences and help educate them on gender issues. One good thing that came out of Beijing 1995, I think, is the GMMP, as Greta told us to mention, the Global Media Monitoring Project. And I encountered this in the course of my research. It's a study done every 5 years, bringing together researchers from all over the world to examine the media one day in the year and to look at how content is produced, what kind of sources proportion of women to men in terms of sources, proportion of women to men in terms of presenters. And the Philippines was part of this study, except I think for 1 year. And I think this was in 2010, something like that. Sadly, this was not very much discussed. I think there were some discussions, but it was not widely discussed, and it could also have been expounded. The study could have been expounded locally. I think inserting the women in the news agenda prompts questions about the deeper issues in the media, like ownership and management of newsrooms. Who really decides the news agenda? The employment of women, women as news sources and women as audience. During this time, women held high positions in major newspapers in the Philippines, as well as broadcast networks. So you had an editor-in-chief who was a woman in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, Philippine Star, Daily Tribune, Business Mirror, ang Pilipino ngayon. But there was also some discussion about whether these women were really able to change newsroom culture to make it more accommodating to women, to make more room for women's stories, or whether they were just perpetrating the male-dominated mindsets, which I think is actually what's happening. You have women in top positions, but they're sort of reinforcing the male culture there, mostly. There are attempts to insert a lot of women's stories and make the workplace more accommodating to women, but I think the dominant culture is still male. And then in 2016, Rodrigo Duterte happened. He's our president, and he is this misogynistic, sexist president who, one study said, made an extremely harmful contribution to how Filipinos develop their expectations of and attitudes towards their sexes. He's the president who undermines the media and belittles women. But overall, there's a greater awareness of women's issues. There's a systematic and organized approach to gender education. Local and international women's organizations became active, and we also have university-based gender groups. For example, at Miriam College, there's the Women and Gender Institute that regularly does an analysis of content analysis of the news to see how women are portrayed, up to the language that is used when referring to women. At the Ateneo where I work, there's a gender hub that also looks at women's issues. So I think we've come a long way since 1995, but also there have been setbacks that we really need to think about.
Thank you so much, Luz. That's a very important point. It's not a straightforward line, but it's back and forth like a sinusoid. So we need to also be aware of this and respond adequately. So we'll reflect on that in the last part of the webinar or our meeting. And for this part, I still have one more speaker, which is Rachel. So let's hear from you, Rachel, now.
Okay. Thank you, Greta. Thank you, ladies. Listening from you just takes me so many years back and, makes the work that we've done very vivid. When you talk about this section J, the strategic objective J1 and J2, I think they're very, very dear to me at a very personal level, because I think during my presidency at IWAT, I remember, of course, my predecessor, Olia, had started it off, but I took it up, and that's why I talked about being very deliberate, being intentional and strategic, and very focused on what you need to do. Because as it was, issues of gender representation, especially in the media, and going by the the GMMP that you talked about, women's participation was very, very low. And so what did we do as IWAT? We decided we'll get into, with little knowledge in research as we did, we'll delve into research to be able to establish gender mainstreaming in the medias that we work. And luckily, because I was working for the public station, the KBC, it was easy to begin to at least do some research. And if you all remember, I think we researched on gender mainstreaming in 10 chapters of IWAT. And this was a very, very interesting experience, because you get in, you realize that people do not even understand what gender mainstreaming is. Even just being able to access the information that you need was so hard. And as we researched and came up with a report on gender mainstreaming in KBC and the other stations, 10 chapters, I'll focus on KBC where I worked. This report that we did actually influenced the establishment or the development of a gender mainstreaming policy in KBC that had never been. And in the process of coming up with a gender mainstreaming policy, we realized there were so many inequalities across board, that we had to go to the next level. And I remember it's at this point that we brought you in, Greta and Diana, to assist us as more established researchers to get a better focus, and did a second report again on the portrayal or the non-stereotypical portrayal of women in the media, because we realized that even where we had women in the media, they were being used very stereotypically. They were the ones that were cooking. They were the ones that were the beauty queens that were being used in the soaps, like when it came to serious issues of discussion, issues of economy, issues of politics, women were left on the side. The reports that we did have helped or influenced KBC come up with a gender mainstreaming policy that has been used up to date, and it has had very, very good impact on the institution, and then, of course, influenced the larger media in Kenya, because, if a public broadcaster can do it, then how can we, the private who have money, not be able to do it? This first gender mainstreaming policy later gave birth to a sexual harassment policy, because we realized the two were so interrelated. When we sat to train even the gender mainstreaming committee that had been formed to be able to come up with a policy, they did not understand what gender mainstreaming was. It became a fight, a push between the men and the men and women in the committee. And that is how we realized that there were serious issues of sexual harassment that were tied to issues of women representation, that the misogyny that Frida talked about, the attitudes that the men had towards the women, that they had to stay in the back that they cannot come to the decision-making table. And so even the content that was being used on radio and television did not have a women representation. In fact, many times at a national level, you'd get panels that are just composed of men, and nobody would think about it, especially when there's serious professional discussions around politics and around the economy and around the other issues. So the policy has been able to guide the content. First, the portrayal of the content that is run on both radio and television. Then secondly, the representation of women in management. And this has been tremendous. At least over the years, from KBC perspective, I can tell you that there's actually 50-50 representation now at the decision-making levels in the boardrooms. And for the first time, the manager, the CEO, the managing director of KBC is a woman. So we have actually made strides. Many people may not know where this came from, but a lot of credit goes to IWAT because it's that first research that was done on gender mainstreaming in KBC that led to the establishment of policies, and now the policies are able to guide the operations, day-to-day operations of the running of the organization. And this has then had an impact on the wider media in Kenya. Luckily, our constitution is very, very progressive. It has gives a lot of freedoms, freedom, access to information, the freedom of the media. And this has also helped to ensure that women now in the broader media in Kenya actually have a voice. And now with technology and the advancement of the online platforms, it's only opened up the space more for women. And we are happy that at least we are seeing that what was Section J actually being actualized as we move forward. So I sit in a very proud place representing IWAT and having contributed greatly to the realization of these objectives. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. And I just want to show our listeners this handbook that was published by IWAT, building on what Rachel you were saying, or putting together all this work that IWAT did around Section J over the years, starting from, as you said, from Olia's and your presidency, Rachel, and following on with Violet. And yes, so it's really ongoing work with IWAT, and I'm also proud to be a member of this organization. Now we're moving on because we are running, I think, short on time. So we will now try to have a short discussion or reflection on how Section J remains relevant after 30 years, if it remains relevant, if it should change, and if so, how, given the changed digital platforms that have reshaped totally how we communicate. As you mentioned, Frida, when all of this started, we didn't have Zoom. First, the Global Media Monitoring Project and the lobbying that happened around it was done by fax. So people were doing everything manually and faxing it. And it was Margaret Gallagher who wrote this book. She reflected on this, that it was just so impressive, like given the tools we have today. Like if you think about how women have managed to mobilize a global movement, 75 countries have participated in the first Global Media Monitoring Project. I mean, it's really impressive and incredible. So I really want to have some kind of like a positive vibe here as well. But nevertheless, we need to reflect on the realities that we are facing today. And as you've mentioned, the improvements are both happening and not really. There is some statistics here that I put together for us for this short section on the relevance of the Section J within film and television. We have here Gina Davis Institute study from 2019. I'm sure there are newer statistics available now, which shows that it's 37% of speaking characters in films that are female. The latest Global Media Monitoring Project, again, as you Luz mentioned, 25% globally. There are some improvements in some countries, but they're not really that great. Then we have the new phenomenon, relatively new, or the new form or the new embodiment of violence, which is now online violence against women and girls and women journalists, harassment and cyberbullying. So the attempts to silence women's voices are now really also happening in the digital sphere, and with the International Federation of Journalists reporting that over 65% of women journalists have experienced cyberbullying, and the newest research from UNESCO and International Center for Journalists, I think they found out 75%, so even more. But then we have also developments like the coalition, the Hold the Line coalition, which is very relevant in the Philippines as well, where we have members of IWARD being harassed. And I mean, we have journalists harassed everywhere. So, but we have a Hold the Line coalition, which unites women globally again to speak against this, to work against this. And we have also movements, global movements like Algorithmic Justice League, to fight against algorithmic bias in digital media, which now works to undermine women's voices on a kind of more invisible level because of the level of algorithms that the platforms use to select stories and to show stories. And so the struggle continues, but also the way we mobilize and we share resources and we try to fight against it or push against it, they also change and are reinvented and continuously take on new shapes and forms. But for this last section, I really just want to give you the voice, give you the platform to reflect on how we can reimagine that Section J remains a relevant tool, or should we find do we need it? Do we need something else? Do we have a better alternative for a global platform or a framework that can make these efforts more strategic and, as Rachel, you were stressing, more focused and intentional, if that is possible, or do we need to focus on our own local communities maybe instead more? And now we will go again in the opposite direction. So Rachel, you will have to start now, if this is okay with you. Maybe you took a break.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Greta. I think yes. Section J is very relevant. Like I said, it's good to have clear something that gives you focus, something that gives you grounding, and especially in law, especially in policy, because then it guides you. Have a document that is guiding the institutions. When you talked about issues that we need to look at, I look at training and mentorship for upcoming journalists as very critical in terms of preparing them for the media landscape that has changed a great deal. And when I talk about training, I'm talking about how, for example, in our Kenyan situation, how relevant is the training that we are giving to the current trends that we are witnessing in media, especially with the online platforms? When you talk about issues like issues of digital security, are they part of the syllabuses that we're training, or how do they become part of the syllabuses? And then with technology and things are changing very fast, how do we keep up with that pace? So I think there is deliberate need to have our focus very clear on the keep a tab on the trends or the emerging issues in media. And that's when I talk about where you talk about issues of cyberbullying, trolling, cybersecurity. And of course, I always say for media, or for us in the media, if you look at the Kenyan media, the bullying of women journalists is really, really on the rise. In fact, for our 16 days of activism, our campaign is actually we're trying to map the attacks against female journalists, both physical and online, as a way of building evidence and as a way of finding strategic collaborations with maybe law enforcement, maybe the judicial system. For us to put the case forward, we need to build this evidence. We need to show that this is happening for us to look for intervention. So I think we need to be very intentional in terms of doing that. And for the 16 days, we have intensified our campaign. We are asking media and journalists, either your personal attacks or attacks against colleagues, to just intensify that report. It's on a map that is public. Anybody can see. I should have actually shared it, but it's mainly in the African region. So we need to be very deliberate. And we also, in Kenya, what has been strong and what is keeping us going is that there's a lot of professional solidarity. like media in Kenya and the Kenya Media Sector Working Group work together to identify, to address issues that affect the media. And this has been very, very helpful in keeping our space, especially for the women in the media. How do we ensure that, especially issues of gender, mainstreaming, gender portrayal is right? And so we have a voice, we have a platform that we can actually be able to share and to air our grievances and to make sure that they are met. For example, during the protests that you saw in Kenya very recently, where a lot of the female journalists were attacked, and especially our female journalists, maybe because of also just you working alongside your colleague as a police officer, and the next time you see they're raining bullets on you, what do you do? So I think those reports and working in solidarity with the rest of the media has helped in addressing some of the concerns. One of the things that I really have been thinking about, I have no answers, but I hope that Frida will be able to talk to it, is holding when we talk about media sustainability and how our finances are dwindling in the industry because of the online platforms, then how do we as an industry hold the techie companies accountable? I know that I think Canada, there's a very good system of ensuring that the revenue that comes from the online platforms is also shared with media. I don't know whether I'm really right, but I think maybe Frida will be able to correct that. But for me, it's just how do we hold them accountable? How do we ensure that we remain professional? Our work of a professional is very clearly distinct from what we'd call citizen journalists, even when we're using the same platform, even with the AI generated content. How do we remain very professional and safeguard this profession like other professionals have done? And lastly, because I think I have 3 minutes, is also, besides getting creative and exploiting the new models that come along with the new trends, I think women also need to invest in media ownership. I think the position of the media owners, especially in the Kenyan context, is very critical. And so if we can think a little more broadly, for me, I don't look at the online platforms as a challenge. I look at them as an opportunity that gives us the drive to be more creative and to be more innovative. And now an open check for the women to be able to own these spaces. And I think we're doing very well on the online platforms, and we can only do better. Thank you.
Greta,
Oh, now it was my turn, and now it was my turn to forget to unmute. So thank you very much. And now we will hear from Luz from the Philippines.
Thanks, Greta. So Section J mentions participation and access to expression and decision-making and the portrayal of women. But I think it needs to be revised. It needs to be improved to ensure that that participation happens without women fearing for their safety or endangering their lives in the process. So in the Philippines, groups like IWART and a group that we recently formed, Movement for the Safety and Welfare of Women Journalists, or We Move, have done advocacy and research on the attacks on women journalists. So these include online and offline attacks. A study that what we had done, found that the top 3 perpetrators of attacks are news sources, men in uniform, and colleagues and superiors. So something needs to be done, especially in this day and age when the platforms are weaponized against women journalists. So at the Asian Center for Journalism, where I work, and also I know that IWART members have done research, we met and we listed down what we think should be done with this problem. So among these are to review the codes of ethics, to review the gender component of codes of ethics, especially since our colleagues are some of those who are responsible for some of the attacks, colleagues and superiors. And then there's also continuing gender trainings for media. We were mentioning in our meetings that it's important to bring the men in and to make them commit to helping protect and safeguard women journalists. Then, of course, sexual harassment continues offline and online. We have no details on how we are going to go about it. We know that there's a law against sexual harassment, but it's so hard to enforce that law. And then we also realize that covering the journalism can be very traumatic for women journalists, especially in the Philippines, where during the time of Duterte, he launched a drug war where he killed people left and right, and journalists' lives were in danger. And it became a very traumatic time. Covering that war became very traumatic, and many women journalists did not have access to psychosocial support. So we are looking for ways to provide this kind of support to women journalists. And then, of course, to recognize that women have unique needs and conditions, and that there are safety nets needed to be in place for women journalists. Of course, raising wages and improving working conditions is part of this effort and advocacy. And also, we see the need for mentoring across generations. We're thinking that younger generations and the older generations should regularly meet and exchange ideas, exchange lessons and tips that will help us, deal with the challenges. And then finally, we have through the groups that meet now, we have vowed to create safe spaces and organize women to be able to share our stories, because it's so difficult. We don't get sympathy outside our groups. It's hard for women to gain sympathy in a misogynistic world. So we start with ourselves and our groups. So that's it from the Philippines.
Thank you so much, Luz. This is really inspiring. I think we can all say that this is useful for other countries and other contexts, and maybe we can share the link to this. I understand it's a report, or you have published this. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. Now we'll hear from Brigitte from Denmark.
Thank you very much. I will broaden it out and be more international. We have heard in our different reflections from the different conferences and Section J related events that the issues highlighted as needed and as priorities continue to remain the same. It has to do with better images, more voices, better positions in media, more safety, and so on. So I was thinking actually to look at our own organization at iWord and to see how we fit in with this achievement and addressing of the gaps that we are facing. We did the strategic plan in 2018, and when you hear the vision in a moment, you can see how much Section J has inspired and influenced. And I quote, "iWord envisages a global environment where the role and space of women in the media is fully recognized, is safe and secure, ensures freedom of speech without fear of online or offline trolling, where the portrayal and image of women is balanced and fair, and where women have an equal share of positions at all levels in mainstream, digital, and community media. Furthermore, iWord envisions a world where women have an equal voice and space in community media, both rural and urban, as citizen journalists, and equal partners in agenda setting, dialogue, and debate." And the mission goes on to say that iWord's mission is to facilitate this change and transformation that is needed. And looking to the strategic themes we have identified, I think it echoes a lot of what I've heard you co-panelists say, talking about the legal and environment and the enabling space where we push boundaries for press freedom and provide opportunities both at national level and, as you were just saying, Luz, within each of the media houses. It's action to advance the role and voice of women in the media and beyond. It is to ensure also that media and film productions are funded, are there, that film festivals take place, and our global reach through sustained local action, which is the reflection of all the global issues spilling into the work at the national, at the chapter levels. And we're looking to what should we do now? I think a lot of really wise and systematic things have been shared already. But from my point of view, I would say we need to continue. With patriarchy, misogynist realities, and the religious backlash, there's a lot to do. I told about our struggles in Denmark, where we still have a lot to do. And I was in Bangladesh in May, just before the uprisings, and worked with women's rights organizations. And there they were showing how the gap of movement was narrowing in because of the religious backlash. So anyway, to continue to seek increased participation through groups, networks, and using the appropriate channels, and the balanced and non-stereotype portrayal of women through campaigns in our own environments, as you were just saying, Luz, and to continue to strengthen our gender analysis and document the situation so that we know what we are up against. And finally, a new one that was not in Section J, to protect women journalists against online and offline harassment. That would be my contribution to this.
Thank you very much, Brigitte. That's really all very important valid points that we continue fighting and pushing back against these developments, or continuation of the different phases that violence against women sort of re-embodies or reinvents itself in this new digital world. And now, please, Maro, this is your spot now to share your perspective on the relevance. I mean, you already said that the Section J was not that visible in your own work, but maybe you can talk about your own work from the perspective of a feminist movement that you are leading in Mexico.
Yes, I think that we need. Of course, I agree with every point you have said already. What is needed to do, but I just want to add that maybe Section J need to include these actions to put media on women's hands, because I think that there are some points that is responsibility of the government, of the media's owners, but as I said sometimes ago, I think that we need to have frequencies, radio frequencies on our hands and channels on our hands, so that we can design the editorial and all the content of the media with this feminist perspective. That feminist is human rights perspective. Is for me, it's the same. We can speak about human rights if we don't speak about from this feminist or women's rights perspective. So I think that we need to do a plan with some goals and indicators that we, in some 5 years more or 10 years more, we can speak about how we really are doing progress and have the media on our hands. Because if we are owners of the media, we can guarantee that all these points that you already speak about it will have some results in some years. Then I think that Section J is important, but we need to do more. But not only we as journalists or communicators or feminist organizations, but we need to do more to put in our laws the law or the policies these goals related to Section J.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I agree. We need more ownership and maybe more wiser policies. Frida, now it's your turn. And also, please unmute. Perfect.
Okay. Now, let's see what I did with my script. I just had it. There we go. All right. In the media profession, as money moves up, wages go down. Freelance fees are falling. Regular employment is scarce. Also, with rampant misogyny and attacks on freedom of the press, it's going to be harder for women and our ideas to advance in mainstream media. Trump is threatening to remove nonprofit status and broadcasting licenses from any organization that disagrees with him. That could decimate both the community and public media sectors. In Canada, the head of the Conservative Party, which is likely to win our next election, has said he'll defund the CBC. Social media is said to have won the recent U.S. elections by feeding select opinions to the public. Popular online communication platforms like X and Facebook impose content censorship at their owners' command. Facebook recently unpublished the Wings page. They said Wings violates their community standards, but not how. I think it's because of a post I shared from another feminist radio program. There are other social media sites, and I'm trying them out. But what's fundamental is the content we offer through any of our outlets. Going back to when we previously pushed this boulder up the hill, there are 8 things Donna Allen said in 1991 about women's media and how it differed from male-controlled media. 1. The conventional journalism of male-owned media reports news in the third person. 2. Men tend to define news as conflict and violence. 3. Male-owned media claim a journalistic goal of, quote, objectivity. 4. Women-owned media are nearly all non-hierarchical. 5. Women's media would replace the competitiveness of male media's scoops and financial rivalry and replace those with cooperation. 6. Women-owned media tend toward a common carrier concept of journalistic function, meaning they are open to diverse submissions from other women. 7. The greatest difference from male-owned media is women's characteristic analysis of mass media as hostile to women. And 8. The 8th difference is content. And here Donna quotes from sources that describe mainstream media as almost never covering the women's movement, except occasionally and in a hostile manner. In my opinion, these principles are easier to practice now than when they were written. The old media landscape has been dissolving before our eyes. In the new media landscape, the fastest growing group of media women are podcasters. Some podcasters, mostly men, have an audience in the millions, but most women's podcasts currently have much fewer. Some, like host Robin Morgan's Women's Media Center Live, boast listeners in 110 countries, and have financial backing from some wealthy and famous women. They distribute on the outlets iTunes and Stitcher. Another podcast I just heard from, called The Babblery, is produced by Suki Wessling out of community radio station KSQD in California. It distributes on Spotify, Amazon, Google, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. She's cutting an episode to the right length for a Wings show right now. The Interparliamentary Union has a series of podcasts on women's issues that we've been allowed to broadcast. Similar to podcasts are recordings of women online, both from Zoom events like the Salons of the Maternal Gift Economy movement, and from women speaking at the UN, for example, and at universities and to organizations. Okay, this is the last paragraph. In this time of scarce resources, it is a waste of energy for feminist media workers to each do our private interviews for individual single outlets. Recognizing each other's work and sharing each other's content with permission, perhaps for pay, and of course with respect and recognition, could increase the reach of women's content and online and elsewhere, and help define and strengthen a global feminist movement.
That's a really wonderful final point, Frida. Thank you for that. I think sharing and strengthening our global movement and each other's voices is going to be critical in these times of backlash and populist voices that are on the rise globally and that are challenging humans' rights, which are women's rights, as you all have stressed. And we cannot really just sit back and relax and watch what's going to happen. But I'm sure we won't. I also want to now ask if there's anyone in the audience that would like to now ask a question or say something, a comment, a reflection. We have a few minutes to go and then we will wrap it up because I think it's been already more than 1.5 hours. So you can just turn your mic on and start talking or raise your hand and of course the panelists as well, if any of you would like to say something, wrap up, final words of reflection or no? So Jola, I just want to say that we also would like to mention Francimea Cumpio, who is a IWART member and a journalist who has been imprisoned on trumped-up charges in the Philippines. And she has been behind bars now for almost 5 years. And there's an ongoing effort in the Philippines to release her. And our colleagues are working relentlessly in the Philippines to see that she's freed. So we just also want to use this platform to express our solidarity with Francimea Cumpio and our sisters in the Philippines, ensuring that this is a success story for Frenchie. And I want to say also that we have our 3 presidents, actually, I was just reflecting on that, 3 IWARTS presidents amongst our listeners here. So we had Rachel Nakitare, who was the panelist. I've seen Violet Gonda also in amongst the listeners, and I also, of course, we have here Jola Jones Mamangun, who is our current president and who's very shy and doesn't want to speak. So I'm just gonna say that we are really grateful to be able to be part of this organization and have this discussion and meet
Frida,
all of you. Wonderful.
you're forgetting Frida.
Oh yes, Frida, of course. I'm sorry, Frida. I mentioned that when I read your bio, but this because I reflected on my membership in when I started working with IWART. It was Rachel, then it was Violet, and now it's Jola. So sorry for that. Yes. So any questions? If not, we will be asking you to put your camera on and we will take a picture. That is the tradition already of IWART that we always take a snapshot of Frida. Frida, you ran away from the photo. Yeah, please, we have a hand raised here from Nima, and you can maybe unmute yourself and put your camera on, and the floor is yours. Hi, nice to
Hello.
see you.
Hi. Nice to meet you all. I do want to appreciate the speakers who have spoken. And one of my concerns is we've been having a rise in femicide cases in Kenya, whereby for the last 3 months, we've had 97 women killed in the country. Since 2016, we've had over 500 women killed. So my question is towards, as journalists who are covering these stories, how can we use this Section J to report these cases in ways that challenge the societal norms, that drive awareness, and advocate for stronger legal and accountable systems? Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is a super important question. Is there anyone who would like to answer to Nima's question, concern? Rachel, maybe you would like to do that?
Thank you, Nema. That's one of our members in IWAT and one of our mentees that we got right from school. Very proud that she's coming on very well and exhibiting the skills that we've been sharing. Thank you, Nema. I think I talked about what we are doing now in terms of mapping those cases. Like we all know, if we are thinking about a legal redress or any policies around issues like that, we have to have enough evidence that shows that that is happening, and we have to give them, like a very concrete report on what exactly is happening. So I think as IWAT Kenya, we're already championing that. I also talked about how we're working together with collaborating with other media stakeholders. And I think maybe if you look at the map that is ongoing now that we're mapping, and if you look at the report that will come, hopefully by the time we mark the International Women's Day, we should be able to be giving recommendations on what on the way forward and what needs to be done. But I think that's a very good question that we need to build on the Section J. I think at the time when Section J was developed, I think the challenges we've talked about, the online issues, were not really as prevalent as they are today. And I think that is an area that we need to reflect on and include in the upcoming report.
Thank you.
I hope I've answered, Nema.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
There was also a hand raised from, I think, Purity, but now you put it down, so I'm not sure if you want to, or your question maybe has been answered, or...
Hello, Madam Rachel has answered the question. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay,
maybe
so
just
now...
maybe just to the wider IWAT family, because this is an international meeting, is to just, again, re-emphasize the need to hold the hands of upcoming journalists and to bring them up to speed and to share the experiences like we've done. I've just noted that actually on the platform, we have a lot of the ladies participating who are originally our mentees from the universities. They graduated at least 2-3 years ago, and they've been performing very, very well in terms of even bringing us more into the digital world than we originally were. So I think as IWAT International, as an organization, we have something to be very, very proud of. So just I wanted to note that both Purity and Nema were part of our mentees of the IWAT Kenya chapter.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Sonia, would you like to?
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a very exciting, enriching assessment of the Beijing conference. I'm just wondering, are there other assessments going on about the Beijing conference? Number 2, will there be eventual sort of worldwide conference, just like the Beijing? Thank you.
I think there's a number of events going on, different countries, different institutions doing their own. I'm not sure about the global conference. Maybe Frida knows something. I think the UN, of course, will. Birgit, you know something. Please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that, Sonia, if you go to the CSW, Commission for the Status of Women page, in preparation of the March meeting, they have actually all countries' national reports and they have regional reports for Europe and Africa and so on. So you can get a lot of information there. So I just wanted to say that, but of course there are many debates. I think at 4 o'clock today there's an online discussion of breaking barriers. It's called the Whole of Society Approach to Gender Equality in Media Development, and this is also taking off from the section J. I can put the link in the chat now.
Chat. Perfect. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, I really appreciate, especially our speakers who had to wake up in the middle of the night or had to stay up. Frida and Maru, shout out to you. And so I don't want to keep it any longer because maybe you want to sleep now. Let's do the picture. If you want to be in the picture, you can put your camera now on, and we will archive this.
Please open your video.
Event.
Yeah, please.
And this is Jola speaking, our president.
The technical person. I miss everyone. Yeah. Okay, open your video, please. Yes. Hi, IC.
Hi, IC.
Great
to see you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. More photo, please. More video. Yes.
Hi, Noni.
Hi, Aradhana.
Hi.
Rebecca, can you open your video?
Hi, Noni. Okay. Are there more? Okay, let's take a photo, please. Okay. Oh, there's more.
Yay.
Okay, 1, 2. Look at the camera. 1, 2, 3.
Yay.
Rebecca, 1, 2, 3. Again. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope this was useful and that we have learned from each other and actually energized a little bit to continue.
Thank you.
If anybody wants to say any final words.
Yeah, take care.
Good night,
Thank
good
you
morning.
very much.
Good morning. Good night.
Bye.